Let me introduce our committee staff. Evelyn Armour is my administrative assistant and helps keep the wheels turning, as does Susan Butler, who's administrative assistant for Chairman Willard on the civil side, but also helps us out in terms of getting to a quorum, which is something we'll talk about in a second. Our legislative counsel, Jill Travis, has been with us for years. Should we say how many? No. We will not. Matt Wasatowski is right over there. He is my session attorney, and he's back for his second time around the block, and appreciate his help and his friendship and his assistance during the sessions. And Brandy Bazemore is our full-time counsel to the Judiciary Non-Civil Committee. Brandy's right here to my left, who is invaluable to the operation here, and we appreciate her very, very much. And introduce a couple of new folks. Drew Brooks. Where's Drew? There he is, holding up the wall over there. He's the intern for the Judiciary Committees. Drew is finishing his last hour. Is that right? The last hour. So we're make or break for you right now. I don't think I would have admitted that. All right. He's finishing his last hour at the University of Georgia with this internship. He hopes to attend law school in the future, and we certainly hope so. Dustin Thompson, where's he? There he is. An extern from the Speaker's office covering Judiciary Non-Civil. Dustin is a 2L, second-year law student at Georgia State, an outstanding law school, and recently finished an externship at the Department of Natural Resources before taking on this externship for the 2013 session. Members, in your folder, Brandy has put in a sheet with your contact information. If you would at some point just fill that out and give that back to her so we know how to reach you. And let me direct your attention. They have the subcommittee list in there.
It should be on the right.
Oh, okay. In your folders, we have two subcommittees. Should be on the right side of your folder there. The first subcommittee is Subcommittee Crimes Against Persons, Property, and Public Administration. That is chaired by Representative Ramsey. Representative Ramsey will retain that subcommittee chairmanship this session. And the second subcommittee is Crimes Against Children, Controlled Substances, and then we put general for those issues that don't neatly fit within either category, frankly, and that's chaired by Representative Setzler, who will be taking on those duties this session as well. Rather than going ahead and assigning members, I thought we'd go, since we're heading into a recess week, take a look at it and think about it over the next few days. If you would, if you have a specific request on a particular subcommittee, please let me know. I'll do my best to go ahead and honor that request. Obviously, we have to make some numbers work, but I thought we'd go ahead and solicit your requests if you have any particular interest in either one of those areas before just making assignments. The final piece of housekeeping that we have are our committee rules, which are on the left inside cover of your folder. These rules have not, for returning members, those rules have not changed since last year. We had made one change 2 years ago. We went a quorum from 8 to 7. I don't anticipate needing to change that in the future. 7, I think, worked well. I think I can count the number on one hand of the times that we didn't have a quorum over the course of an entire session. That's pretty good. I will go ahead and reserve the right to ask you to reduce that if necessary later on in the session. I don't think that's going to happen, but it could. So if you haven't already, just take a quick look at that. And again, for returning members, there are no changes from last year. And at the pleasure of the committee, I'll go ahead and take a motion to approve the rules. Moved by Mr. Setzler, second by Mr. Coomer. Any questions from members? Hearing none, all in favor of the gentleman's motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have, and the rules are adopted. Thank you for being here on a Friday morning. We have two bills on the agenda that where time is really of the essence, or else, frankly, we wouldn't be here on a Friday right before recess week. And candidly, I had hoped to go ahead and have this meeting yesterday, but because committee assignments were not announced until late Wednesday, that would have precluded us from giving notice of the meeting for at least 24 hours. And for new members to the committee, that's something that we really really strive to do and we're pretty successful at. So we would have had this meeting yesterday, but because, again, committee assignments didn't come out late, we wanted to go ahead and afford more notice to interested parties, which is why we're here today. In terms of the time is of the essence nature of both of these bills, that'll become apparent as we discuss them here this morning. And with that, what I'm going to do before calling on Mr. Ramsey to present his bill, are there any questions about anything from members of the committee? Hearing none, Mr. Ramsey, you're recognized. House Bill 57.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to ask Rick Allen and Nellie Miles to join us at the table up here. Rick Allen is the Director of Georgia Drug and Narcotics, for those of you that have not met Mr. Allen. And Nellie Miles is a chemist from the Georgia Crime Lab. She's going to, Nellie, I don't know your official title. I don't know if that's adequate, but she's going to help explain what all these really, really long words are and give us assurances that we're not banning cherry Coke or anything like that by what we're voting on here today. Those of you that have been here before, this is should be a familiar issue to you. This is, I think, the third time that we've taken a bite at this apple, and I'm not going to make any assurances that it's the last time we're going to take a bite at this apple. This bill is all about synthetic marijuana. Many of you have heard about it, particularly over the last year, starting around the time of last session. There were a couple of deaths reported, one of which was in my district. In fact, many of you remember we named last year's version of this bill Chase's Law, after Chase Burnett, a young man in my district who died after consuming these products. What they are products that are sold in gas stations typically. They're not sold as synthetic marijuana. They're packaged and sold as incense or bath salts or some other benign product, but it's being sold purely for the use as a hallucinogen. It's called everything from K2 to spice and all kinds of other names under the sun. I was telling a story to Rick before we came in here. I had a parent before the young man in my district died who called his son using these products. It was, and really it came down on him and talked to him, had a hard conversation with him. At the end said, you know, he got it at the store, it must be okay. And then of course about 2 weeks later what happened with the young man in our district happened, and it became very apparent to them just how insidious these products are. I was just told before I came in here by Mrs. Miles, the potency of these products are 10 to 100 times more potent than marijuana, the garden variety, the marijuana, the kind that's grown in the ground, and it's being sold in our gas stations to children, and we're trying to come up with a way to get at it that doesn't require us to come back here every single year and schedule these new chemical compounds. They just told me that literally last year they were holding stock, these new chemical compounds. They found a way to reformulate this product, this synthetic marijuana. Last year we scheduled every known chemical compound. We have one of the very best crime labs in the United States of America here in Georgia, and they did their very best last year to find every combination of these chemicals that made up what's being sold in the store. And they literally are so smart, these distributors of this. They were holding stock. They had already sent the bill off to many of these manufacturers are in China. They had developed a new combination of chemicals and were holding the stock until after the governor signed the bill. And then there was about a 2 week lag time where we got the products off the shelf. 2 weeks later, they had new stuff back on the shelves. The pharmacy board has the authority in the interim to emergency schedule the drugs, and it gets the products off the shelf. But what it doesn't allow them to do, it doesn't have the force of law to go after them for criminal sanctions, and that's what this is about. This is about putting into law what the pharmacy board did in the interim to get those products off the shelf to make sure it has the force of law. I kind of liken this to playing whack-a-mole, and I wish we had come up with a better way to do this so it's more proactive than reactive. I'm actually looking at some things. A young man's father out in Dustin Hightower's neck of the wood who lost his son to this. He died after ingesting one of these substances. Actually, I've had some really good conversations with him, and he sent me some ideas that other states are looking at, and we've all committed from Mr. Allen on down to take a look at that in the weeks ahead. So this may not be the only time we deal with this issue this session. But for right now, this is time sensitive. It needs to be done, and I'm going to ask Mr. Allen if he wants to add anything to that. But other than that, I would yield for your questions and then ultimately your favorable consideration.
Just at last, excuse me, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Last year, there's been said that, we didn't get it right. Well, last year, doing what we did it right. Georgia was at the very front of the cutting edge of what's going on in the country. And quite literally, DEA has told us once these bills are posted, the same with them, they're waiting with, we scheduled all apples and oranges last year. And there's a grapefruit and a peach waiting there to come onto the shelves as soon as the governor signed the bill. So even DEA is having to think way outside the box, and we're working with DEA. There was a meeting several months ago out at GBI with crime labs from probably 12, 13 states, as well as DEA crime lab. And everybody's talking together, everybody shares their ideas, and when one comes up with something, everybody knows about it. So again, Georgia's very proactive at the cutting edge. Nellie's head of the chemical section. She is the man, so to speak. And but Georgia's doing what we can do. We're not just sitting there wasting our time. There's a lot, like a duck paddling under their feet underwater. We're working.
Where's the stuff coming from?
China, for the most. I would say, again, DEA is our source. It comes in from China. It's packed in. Homeland Security has a watch out. It comes in through different, they're shipping into 5 to 10 different UPS boxes, say in Atlanta. And if Homeland Security, or I got used to saying that instead of Customs, they catch it at 1 or 2 locations, and the other 5 or 6 come through. That way they have their product. So they're that devious and that operational. And they take this powder, they mix it up with acetone, so to speak. They buy bales of an herb that you can just buy anywhere, I guess. I've never seen a bale of an herb, but they get these bales of herbs, they spread them on cooking trays, they spray them with this powder that's been liquefied, dries out, then they package it. So what was let's say K2 this week, in that same package, once it's been made illegal, they can come up with a K2 next week. It's got a different drug in it altogether. There's no regulation of how it's packaged or anything such as that.
Our friends on the federal side, I realize there are limitations to what it is that we can do and when we can do them, but what if anything are they able to do, or what discretion do they have? I'm not saying that they have tools at their disposal that perhaps we don't, and I'm just wondering what it is that they've done from to use Mr. Ramsey's language, what have they done from a proactive standpoint to exact whatever pressure they can within proper boundaries?
They're like 2 steps behind Georgia, but they're doing what they're encumbered, I guess, or hindered. Everything they do basically has to be approved by the FDA. FDA has to do a study on it, and then yeah, seriously. And if you dealt with the FDA, that takes a year or 2.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the DEA deputy director that schedules these drugs told me that if he, because of the way they have to do things, if he scheduled 1 new drug every day, he would be doing that every day of his career until he retired. There's so many of them out there. And they are right there with everybody else trying to find the best way to do it, to schedule or make this stuff illegal.
Mr. Pack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A quick question about the biosimilars and the synthetic drugs that are coming out. My understanding is these are sold a lot of times at like not grocery store, but convenience stores and things like that. I always wondered if it's packaged and theoretically you're prosecuting someone for dispensing, how would they know what it is? I know that there's a general intent in terms of as long as you know it's something illegal, it's okay. You can prosecute them on that, but because of the rapidly changing chemical composition of products and different marketing, from a practical perspective, enforcement, how do you distinguish or how do you prove intent?
Intent, meaning when they when the agents go in to see something and go in to buy it, do undercover buys, it's going to the crime lab and they find it. They will seize it and hold it if it's tested and found to be something that's illegal or banned, as we came to call these drugs. Then they keep it. But if it's not, they have to give it back to them and they can sell it.
I think the philosophy is if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. So with the distinct packaging, I think your question as far as there's a distinct type of packaging it comes in. And so that's enough reason to go ahead and bring it to the lab, and we do our best to turn it around and test it and say exactly what's in there.
I'm trying to get at, okay, I understand the scheduling problem, things like that. I think we had the same thing with the bath salts last year. The issue that I have is if it's packaged and changed, right? And they call it like herbal incense and whatever, and a retailer just sells it. How do you get the message out that this is illegal? That's what I'm concerned about.
That's what we've been encouraging citizens groups, drug abuse groups, to put the word out, the media, whoever, to let people know this is illegal. If you go into a store and you're going to pay $1 for a pack of cigarettes, chewing gum. And here's this little package here with some leafy material in it, and it's for $25, and you're getting about an ounce. That's what we call a clue. When we're trying to tell the retailers, most of the retailers have stopped the gas station attendants. There's 2 or 3 different associations. One association has told its members, asked its members to quit selling it, and they have. Another association is working on that. The biggest problem comes from what we call the smoke shops, and representative from Cherokee County, y'all got a very aggressive drug unit up there, and the same smoke shop in Woodstock, once they would do a raid, they would restock, and I think they hit them 4 times. And what they found were baggies of cash of $1,000 per baggie, and they just throw the baggie over behind the counter. They just kept doing it. They were making too much money to stop. The legitimate people have stopped. Let's put it that way. The people who have a clue and know what they're doing, they've kept on doing it. So therein lies your problem. They said, well, until you arrest me, I can't do anything. I'm going to keep doing this.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Mr. Sethler.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Allen, appreciate you coming and appreciate you bringing your technical expertise with you today.
Yeah, she's not mine. She belongs to Vernon.
Stay corrected. Wanted to ask, describe what power you have to emergency schedule drugs in the interim, what that does for us as a state from a law enforcement perspective, and what it cannot do.
Okay, well, it's not us, the drug narcotic. The pharmacy board has the power. I guess you could call what we do is kind of like the whip in the house. We're the go-between between the crime lab and the pharmacy board. What the pharmacy board has always had the authority to do was emergency schedule drugs, and in the past, say drugs like Soma or ketamine, they were found to be a problem. The board emergency scheduled them, that way you could get it off the shelf, and then when the legislature came in, you codified it. The board just always had that authority to do that, to emergency schedule drugs. It just doesn't carry the force of law. So every time the crime lab had come up with something, the last 6 months, we would get the list, we would go to the pharmacy board, they would immediately schedule a phone conference, and then within probably 24 hours the drug had been declared banned, and we put the word out to all law enforcement across the state that it was banned. And that's what we've been doing. But like I said, it was almost like I was getting weekly emails from the crime lab telling me, well, we found another one.
Mr. Chairman, I've got questions that may be best directed to the author that we could take up later, but it's your pleasure.
I mean, are they central to the bill?
Well, they are. I mean, my question was, does this bill empower the State Board of Pharmacy when they emergency schedule a drug to give them to make that have the force of law? And is there a way to do that artfully? And is that something we want to do from a policy standpoint?
I don't know how we could grant de facto legislative authority to a board. I don't, pending, we cannot. And I think that's part of the problem here, and that's, I guess that's one of the limitations of us being a part-time legislature. There are things that are going to happen in the course of the rest of the year, and it's frustrating.
Of course, that board does not have the ability to promulgate rule or reg either, correct?
They can do rules
Well, they do.
and regs, but they can't do anything criminal.
Understood.
Perhaps as a deterrent effect, I offer the author. I don't know that we could pass a, over time, not in this bill today, but maybe create some kind of civil right of action where if a store knows that there's an hallucinogenic effect, that there's the potential for harm or whatever, even if it's not illegal, that could be pursued civilly to provide a deterrent effect. I don't know if that's possible. But
I'm committed. I don't want to do this every single year. If we have to, I will. I believe that strongly in the danger of these products. But I'm committed to in the very early days of this session to really thoroughly study what other states are doing. If there's any tool out there, that's certainly something worth considering. I'm going to really take a look at it, and hopefully members of the committee will help me in that process and see if there's, in addition to this, which needs to get done today, if there's other tools that we just haven't thought of or that other states are doing that we can give law enforcement to deal with this issue.
Ms. Ballinger.
I think that's.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you please explain what halogen analogs are and what homologs are?
Yes, I can do that. Halogen analogs are drugs that, as an example, you'll see on their UR144 in parentheses. Right after we listed UR144, a halogen analog, which was closely similar to that drug, came. We saw 5-fluoro UR144. So as opposed to having to deal with all the changing drugs that are similar, halogens fall, if you look at the periodic table, you got fluorine, chlorine, all of those are very similar. And so they'll just take one of those molecules and add it to that base drug. So instead of having to do that individually, we just said halogen analog. So if it's closely related, it will cover it. A homolog is essentially a compound that, if you think about the base structure, I'll take me for example. If you look at me, if I'm standing up, my full body, if I add maybe my arm to myself and extend it out, I essentially have my core structure, but then I change by a repeating unit. So they can just tack on one particular chain, and you still have your base structure. So doing the homologs will also take care of any like drugs that come up. So that's how we added that.
Is it possible to have, because I'm not a chemist, is it possible to have a halogen analog or a homolog of one of these substances that does not have the same qualities as the base substance?
Well, if it's a halogen analog or a homolog, it will have the same structure. So it will have the same parts, but it will differ very, very small. It will be a small difference. And so what that does is that it will take those individual drugs that we listed and anything that is similar in that way by the halogen analog.
Okay.
So you don't have to worry about if they say, oh, I'm going to go to the, I'm just going to add another like chlorine to it.
And maybe the use of the word quality was the wrong word. What I mean is it possible that we'll be making illegal the possession or use or manufacture of substances that really don't have any particular narcotic effect or any dangerous qualities to humans who use those substances?
What we have found, and the best thing we can do is go by what the drugs that we have seen coming into the lab. Once you take, if it has that core group, that's where most of your chemical activity is going to be. So adding something, there's no chance for it to be abused. What we've seen with what we've added, and a note with Chase's law, like the representative said, they held those products and these. What we've seen with what we've added, and a note with Chase's law, like the the representative said, they held those products, and these are literally the ones that we've seen. I even have a chart here that kind of displays the XLR11, the UR144. These are the majority of what we've seen. And so the good thing about Chase's Law is that we have not seen a new bath salt since Chase's Law. So I wanted to make that point. I'm very pleased to report that it's the synthetic cannabinoids that we just can't seem to, handle on, or, it's the game of whack-a-mole that we've talked about.
And you believe that that by including halogen analogs and homologs in this bill's language, that will help to essentially head off the manufacturers of these substances who are simply changing one part of the chemical structure to get around whatever we're doing in the law currently.
I absolutely think it will help. I would be lying if I told you I wasn't concerned that they'll leave this group altogether. The UR144, the XLR11, that's what's common. Yes, there is a concern that they're holding and saving completely different chemical compounds that are totally unrelated that the lab has not yet seen. Because again, to date, this captures everything we've seen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Like I said, y'all got a good one here. This crime lab knows what they're doing.
Yes, sir. Thank you both for your work. Any further questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? Mr. Setzler moves due pass. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Hightower. Any further discussion? Any amendments? Seeing none, all in favor of the gentleman's motion signify by saying aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
We'll go to House Bill 55. I'll ask David McDade on behalf of the DA's Association, Dan Mayfield of the Gwinnett DA's office, and Jason Saliba of the Cobb DA's office to come forward. A week or two back, the Supreme Court of Georgia issued a ruling that said that a Superior Court judge who issued a warrant for a wiretap did not have the authority to issue a warrant for a wiretap beyond their jurisdiction. What you have in front of you in House Bill 55 is a response, a very narrowly tailored response to that decision, which is really a legislative fix. And what the bill proposes to do is to provide authority to the judge to issue a wiretap, issue a warrant for a wiretap that would have statewide application. Of course, in this day and age, and really far before this day and age, ongoing criminal activity is not confined to the territorial boundaries of a particular jurisdiction or judicial circuit. In this wireless age, of course, it's much more complex. It's across counties, across states, across regions, and law enforcement, in order to go ahead and simply to keep up, speaking only for myself, has to have the tools necessary and in order to combat this this true scourge and threat to public safety. And of course, the ability to utilize a wiretap is essential. And without it, and I'm simply referring to comments that were made by a district attorney in a publication a week or two back, said that this particular decision, the result of it, is the fact that there are investigations, current and certainly future, that are certainly imperiled by it. And so what we seek to do today, and what I have before you in House Bill 55, is, again, a legislative response, but really a fix, because the statute is very narrowly written, as it is right now, and in order for law enforcement to continue to go ahead and do their job, these wiretaps must have, or the authority of a judge to issue the warrant for the wiretap must have statewide application. I think that just intuitively makes sense from an enforcement standpoint, and that is all that the bill does. I want to make sure it's very clear that the proposal, that the bill, House Bill 55, does not seek to expand the wiretap capability. It simply is, it maintains the status quo, but other than the fact of having statewide application, which according to a unanimous Supreme Court, currently that particular judge does not have. With that, let me ask our witnesses who I've introduced previously, if they have anything to add, subtract, correct, please feel free, and thank you for being here.
Mr. Chairman, thank you and thank the members of this committee for agreeing to meet and take up this issue, because it is a tremendously important issue to the prosecution community and to public safety in Georgia. The Supreme Court decision that was rendered, I believe on December 7th, did exactly what the chairman said. The Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, ruled that under the current wiretapping statute that exists, that the order issued by the judge is limited to the jurisdiction for which that judge presides in. And in the modern age of technology and communications, we all know that people involved in criminal enterprises don't confine themselves in their conversations to one location. But in a practical application of what the problem is, I want you to kind of let me give you just a very brief understanding of how the process actually works so that you can understand why this fix is so important. When law enforcement is conducting an investigation, and under the previous law, the law the Supreme Court has ruled upon, when we apply for a wiretap order, the technology that exists that allows us to monitor or intercept those communications that the court has authorized us to intercept is fairly complex and fairly expensive. Most jurisdictions do not possess the technology, the equipment, the hardware, or the personnel to be able to then set up a listening post to monitor those communications that the courts have authorized us to monitor. There is a location not very far from this building that we sit in that's called HIDA. It's the acronym for High Intensity Drug Trafficking. It's basically a task force. It's a federal program. And in that building, they have accumulated all the technical equipment that is used and is necessary for law enforcement agencies to go there and monitor the communications that we have been authorized to listen to. Well, that is in Fulton County. And this decision by the Supreme Court, which we do not take exception with, it's a statutory construction decision, fairly straightforward, said that, one, the prosecutor that applies for that wiretap order must have jurisdiction over the crime. So it must be a crime. If it's in my circuit, it must be in Douglas County. First, that's the predicate. I have to be the prosecutor that has jurisdiction over the crime. And under the Supreme Court decision, the listening or the interception of that information also has to occur in the jurisdiction of the judge that issued that. Well, we don't have the technology to do that. We don't have a listening post. We don't have a hardwired system with interpreters and translators sitting in Douglas County to do that. And most jurisdictions do not. The vast majority in this state do not. So historically, we make arrangements to go to the HIDA location in Atlanta with our wiretap, and that's where we download and listen to the information, and that's where it's interpreted, that's where it's intercepted. What this bill simply does is says we can continue doing what we've been doing. We can continue to go to the HIDA location where all the equipment exists and continue to intercept the information there. And the way that we're asking that you do this, and the chairman has explained it absolutely perfectly, we're simply asking that the judge's wiretap order have effect statewide, meaning we can go and intercept those communications at the locations where we're equipped to intercept them. That's simply what it does.
And just to be clear, it's both the interception can be extraterritorial outside the jurisdiction, and the listening post could be in a completely different place. The statewide application applies to both the interception, the actual interception, as well as the listening post, which could be in two different locations, correct?
Under federal statute, the interception is where the transmission is actually listened to.
Oh, okay. So that would be the listening post as well.
Where it's overheard.
Okay.
Where the person sits there with a headset and listens to it and takes it down.
Okay.
But in the day of modern technology, most people communicate now on cell phones, and cell phones are transient. You can be in a car in Gwinnett County and in 15 minutes be in Cobb County and 20 more minutes be in another jurisdiction. So we look for the location of the listening post being where we're actually listening to the interception to be the key component in all this.
Gentlemen, do you have anything to add? Or?
The only other thing, the other cost, you talk about the hardware, and I know Representative Pack knows this from his prior career, it's the translators as well. This is really to combat organized crime. The case that came out was Laotian. the cartels, the Mexican cartels, are the big target here. The interpreters that DEA provides, and they partner with us and provide those for us, you're talking about $16,000 to $20,000 per phone line per month just for the interpreter. That's not the phone bills, the hardware, anything else. You do not have a county in this state that can afford that. That's the other thing above the hardware. Even the counties that could afford the hardware will never be able to pay the interpreter cost. And the only way to combat cartels, as you know from news reports, they're very brutal, they're very vicious. Outsiders are not allowed in. We can't use informants. And federal law requires, and will obviously still require after this, this is our last option. We have to show to the court that all other conventional remedies have been exhausted before we can get a wiretap. That's a base federal requirement that will always be in effect. But for us to go in as a last option to go after cartels and foreign organized crime, we have no other options with cell phones and the fact they don't let in outsiders. And you don't have a county that can afford that bill on their own. Thank you.
The only other thing that I would add is that there is some implication in the opinion that the district attorney can go to perhaps a Fulton County judge to obtain the wiretap. The problem with that is that Fulton County judge has no connection with that case whatsoever. And you're asking a judge to spend, I've had judges on extensive wiretap cases have put in 100 hours or more of work making sure that the wiretap is done properly, signing all of the documents. A Fulton County judge that has no investment in a Gwinnett County case whatsoever is not going to be willing to spend the time and effort that is required to run a wiretap for Gwinnett County in Fulton County. So what's proposed in the opinion is that simply Danny Porter, my district attorney, go to Fulton County, but that judge has no interest in that investigation whatsoever, and cannot properly supervise that wiretap, as the judges are called upon to do. This is a very intrusive investigative technique. So the judges play a key role in making sure that the wiretap is done properly, and that motivation is not there for a Fulton County judge when it's a Gwinnett County case.
Let me ask you a question, just to make sure it's clear to members of the committee and just in general going forward. As Section 2 of the bill as it relates to the pen register. The pen register is that mechanism that law enforcement uses in order to track, I'm going to say this inartfully, but a series of calls go from person of interest A to person of interest B over the course of time. There's a pattern there. Those individuals have known previous activity. That is what you use as the pretext in going to the judge for the issuance of the wiretap, and it's the mechanism literally just traces the calls itself.
Pen registers and trap and trace devices give us in real time an electronic recording, not of the content of any communication, but of the fact that phone number A is talking to phone number B. It allows us to get what you'd call maybe the billing information in real time. We can get it immediately, which lets us build up more probable cause to apply for the wiretap itself that would then authorize us to listen to the content of the conversation. But yes, that's correct. That's why the bill is in two parts. The first section deals with the statutory authority for capturing or intercepting the actual content. The second part of the bill deals with the section that speaks to the trap and trace devices.
Right.
Correct.
Which gets you to the content.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Pack.
Thank you. Just for the record, is the case you're referring to Longcott versus State?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And my understanding is that the Supreme Court has said that if our legislator had intended to grant Superior Court's authority to issue wiretap warrants effective for interception outside circuits, it could have easily done so explicitly, and we're doing that by this bill. Am I right?
Correct. We hope so.
A clarifying question out of an abundance of caution on line 35 and 36. Given the fact that the pen register is that mechanism that leads you to the communications, for the wiretap itself, do we have any structural problems with the use of the word communications on line 36?
I believe with due respect, I think Legislative Council has addressed an issue that we have discussed amongst ourselves. If the committee and the chairman are interested in an adjustment of that sentence, we are prepared to at least explain that we've analyzed that. The word communications is a broader term than is used in the federal statute. But we've talked with Nels Peterson and the Attorney General's office. Out of respect for this process, we were willing to move ahead with the language that we presented to you because we believe it's supportable. But Mr. Mayfield would have a comment that would speak to that specifically if the court, if you would entertain it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I just want to make sure that we're getting it right. It's that simple. Please.
My thoughts are is that the language as proposed is adequate, but there may be some room for perhaps improvement. My thoughts were perhaps striking the words interception of communication in those two lines. In
Lines 35 and 36.
Striking those three words and replacing them with use of the pen register or trap and trace device. That way we are eliminating the word communication, which has a little ambiguity to it.
It's a term of art in the federal statute that suggests that it would cover the communications themselves, the conversations. And in the pen register, trap and trace, we're not recovering the conversations, just
right.
the data. So,
I mean, you can make an argument that's evidence of a communication, but it's not a actual communication.
that's correct. The safety net to this, in our analysis, was we're still limited by the federal definitions under the wiretap statute anyway, which would not allow us to use the second part to capture communications in its common sense. But if the committee is willing, we would be amenable to the correction or the additional language.
I mean, we got here because of statutory construction. I don't want to make the same,
That's right.
not that we made that mistake that was under when that was drafted. It was certainly before us, but we don't want to go through this process only for the privilege of having another, construction problem
Right.
later on. So let me give my obligatory glance to the Attorney General's office and see if that office has. I don't get the. If anything, I think that change makes it tighter and certainly more consistent, given the fact that we're looking at pen registers. But I want to make sure that we're not having the law of unintended consequences kick in either.
Mr. Chairman, we believe the language as presently drafted is perfectly adequate, but we certainly have no objection to it.
Okay. Let's read the applicable sentence again for us, please,
Yes.
on line 35 and 36.
On line number 35, striking the word interception of, and on line 36, striking the word communications. Replace that with use of the pen register or trap and trace device.
Okay. So such order shall have statewide application and use of the pen register and trap and trace device shall be permitted in any location in this state. Yeah. Yeah. Mr. Sessler.
Mr. Chairman, to the witness, I don't know the technology here. You guys work with this frequently. Are we confining the technology that could? Are we confining ourselves in statute to limit future potential technologies that could be used in a wiretapping context that you wouldn't want to limit?
You're not. Trap and trace and pen register is defined in OCGA 161160 with a broader definition. That's the term of art that has been used for 20 years. They're different, for lack of a better term, there are different technological names used for those, but as it's defined in 161160, that leaves it open for new technology for us. And then the interception communications in the first part of the bill, of course, is just a pure interception, not based on what type of technology we use.
I just asked that question because there's a lot of checks and balances and controls in this process. We're going through a very rigorous process to get this. I just wouldn't want to outsmart ourselves by unnecessarily narrowing this. But okay.
Mr. Hightower.
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Travis addressed my issue when they said it would need to be A just to be more uniform with
All right.
lines 30 and 31.
Okay. Any further questions from members of the committee? Mr. Peterson. Sure.
Interception is a term that is discussed in the decision of the Supreme Court as incorporating within it the location of the listening post.
Mm-hmm.
If we take the word interception out, that may inject some ambiguity into precisely what it is we're talking about when we're talking about location. And so it may be that if we said interception by the pen register or track and trace device, that would still refer to the listening post, or the post where the data is downloaded, which is the entire point of this, without risking the ambiguity that might be injected by removing the word interception.
So you'd have it read, such order shall have statewide application and interception by use.
Interception by the pen register.
By use of the pen register and trap and trace device shall be permitted, etc.
But removing the problematic word of communication.
Right. So ultimately what we'd be doing is, did y'all absorb that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Any thoughts or objections to that?
It worked.
Okay.
We've had all these conversations, and we're all on the same page.
Okay.
And I trust Mr. Peterson. He gets to defend this.
I do
for
too.
us.
Ms. Travis, did you have any thoughts about Mr. Peterson's comment? And so it goes. So the language is to be doubly clear. Such order shall have statewide application. I'm sorry. And interception by use of a pen register and trap and trace device shall be permitted in any location in this state. By use of a pen register and trap and trace device, or yeah. Okay. Ms. Travis, you've got that? I'm sorry. No, no, go ahead. So we've got such order shall have statewide application and interception by the use of a pen register or trap and trace device shall be permitted in any location in this state. Right. A trap and trace. You've got that, Ms. Travis?
Yes. Chairman Cooper was suggesting also to add the word "the" before the word interception.
That's what you just read.
No, okay. He added the "the" after the "by." It's not. So, can I?
Please.
I think what the global idea is, such order shall have statewide application and the interception by the use of a pen, register, or trap and trace device shall be permitted in any location in this state.
That sounds right. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any, Mr. Coomer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have not read the opinion that we're talking about, and so I'm a little bit behind the curve here, but I'm a little concerned going back on line 16 and 17 where we're talking about a superior court having jurisdiction over the crime under investigation. When we talk about, and there's the line above refers to a district attorney's jurisdiction, and there's a different meaning of jurisdiction when you're talking about a law enforcement officer and you're talking about a judge's jurisdiction. Jurisdiction for a judge or for a court is more of a constitutional matter. We know that Superior Court judges have jurisdiction over a subject matter, but they have authority throughout the entire state. They're not limited to the geographical boundaries of their circuit in terms of where they have authority. So I'm worried that we may be creating a a bit of a confusion because we're using the same, we're referring to an issue before a judge of Superior Court having jurisdiction over the crime under investigation. Well, a Superior Court judge would have jurisdiction over any criminal investigation anywhere in the state, arguably. Are we by trying to clarify this, are we actually making it more confusing by confusing the concept of jurisdiction of a district attorney with jurisdiction of a Superior Court? To me, it looks like we might be creating another problem for us, for prosecutors in the future.
The opinion actually directly addresses that. There are certain things for which state Superior Court judges have authority statewide, particularly equity matters and things of that nature. When you start talking about search and seizure, search warrants, which essentially a wiretap, is a much more complicated search warrant. The opinion at page 9 talks about that the state contended the wiretap statute's general language permits a judge of Superior Court should be construed as making an express grant of authority to our state Superior Courts to authorize wiretaps for interceptions conducted outside of their judicial circuits. However, we cannot ascribe such meaning to the statutory language, and it goes on. Essentially, if I'm going to get a search warrant to search a car, and that car is in Fulton County, but it is a Cobb County case, I got to go to Fulton. What we're trying to do here is to make sure, as Mr. Mayfield said, the judge who really has a vested interest in this and is really going to make sure law enforcement and the DA's offices and everybody else does what they're supposed to do is the one issuing the warrant, so that I can't, if my judge says no, I can't then go to Columbus and find a judge who's not ever going to be presiding over the trial or have anything to do with that case to issue a warrant for me to come up and tap a phone in Cobb County or Gwinnett or Macon or wherever. The court specifically on bottom of page 9, top of page 10, gave us the language that the chairman has proposed, and it's to limit and state which court, so that you don't have every Superior Court judge and every circuit can write wires for anywhere in the state. They've got to have some rational nexus to that case. They need to be answerable to the people in their circuits, just like the DA with jurisdiction over the crime is. And that way you're cutting down the judge shop and you're making sure you've got a judge who's got a vested interest in having this done right.
I understand that, and I understand the purpose. I think it's a little bit confusing because you're talking about a judge of Superior Court having jurisdiction over the crime under investigation, and I mean the judge of Superior Court. The Superior Court has jurisdiction as defined by the Constitution. There's a statute that says the Superior Court judges have authority throughout the state. So my point is the judge of the Superior Court has jurisdiction. I mean, as a concept, jurisdiction as defined by the Constitution. It's not a geographical concept. Jurisdiction is not a geographically limited concept. And so if you're talking about trying to make a nexus between a judge having a case in his or her circuit under investigation, there's probably a better way to say that than to just say having jurisdiction over the crime.
There are statutes, and cited in the decision, there are statutes that do limit a judge's geographical application of their authority. Search warrants is one in 17520. The statute cited in the Loncott decision talking about the ability for a judge to order the production of phone records and other types of business records specifically limits or grants extraterritorial. The Constitution does give a judge statewide jurisdiction in certain cases, but in Fourth Amendment context, what we're dealing with here, they do not currently have jurisdiction outside of their circuit.
Okay, so let me ask you two questions. Number one, do you understand what my concern is? And number two, are you comfortable with the language as it is, considering my concern?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Okay.
And we had that same discussion, and we looked at the opinion and talked to the AG's office when we were looking at this. And we believe the court gave us very clear direction on what they would approve when the next case goes up to them.
Okay. As long as you understand what my concern is, yes, and you're satisfied that it's good, then I'm fine with it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Pack. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had the same concern with Representative Coomer when I read the language, but One, I think you were talking about is subject matter jurisdiction of a Superior Court judge. And in terms of geographic location, if you read the opinion, I think they're talking more about venue, having a competent jurisdiction of the Superior Court judge to issue the warrant. And you're comfortable with the language jurisdiction covering both of those concepts. Am I correct?
Yes, I think you're absolutely correct.
Okay.
It's more of a venue analysis. I agree.
Any further questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, I don't have any other sign-ups on the witness list. What is the pleasure of the committee? Move to pass by Mr. Setzler, second by Mr. Ramsey. Are there any amendments? We'll go ahead and pass it by substitute, and we ultimately go ahead and pass it out, but I'll offer the amendment on lines 35 and 36 so that it'll read, such order shall have statewide application, and the interception by use of a pen register or trap and trace device shall be permitted in any location in the state. Would anyone like me to read that again? Is there any objection to the amendment? Hearing none, the amendment's adopted. Are there any other amendments? Seeing none, on the gentleman's motion of due pass, and we'll say by substitute, all in favor of the gentleman's motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion's adopted. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Thank you to the Attorney General's office for your work as well. Thank you, members of the committee. We're adjourned.